Greetings, citizens, and thanks for tuning in to episode 72 of the Nindie Nation podcast. We're your one-stop shop for everything independently developed for the Nintendo Switch, and if you're new here, welcome. Each week, we briefly discuss every single indie game releasing on the eShop, and when we're done there, we head over to the deals to help you find just the thing to keep your Joy-Cons synced. You can find each episode of Nindie Nation on Monday, either on podcast feeds or on the Nindie Nation YouTube channel, alongside Let's Plays and more indie game content. Nindie Nation is brought to you by our friends at the Nintendo Village, your home for everything Nintendo, and you can go check them out at thenintendovillage.com. This week on episode 72, we're covering deals and new releases for July 4th through July 12th. But as always, we've got some stragglers who decided to release their new games without telling us or anybody else. Some of these are good and some of them are Nindie no-nos, but there's only one way to find out. So let's kick things off by taking a look at the neglected Nindies since episode 71. Quell Zen is, I swear, a chill puzzle game by Cubite Interactive that we've discussed at least twice already. This one, which I'm almost positive is not actually new this week, launches with a 75% discount for $1.99 because, again, I'm pretty sure this is not actually new. Swarmriders, though, is a 49-cent release also by Cubite that I thought looked cool enough to stop writing here, ask them for a code, and I'll be right back after I've had some time to check out what they call a machine gun swarm surfing endless runner plus twin-stick shooter arcade mashup. Okay, I just played it. There's literally nothing else but just one run where you see how long you can survive, and it feels like something that came out of a game jam, which is cool. It's good, but just know that I played like 5 runs and I'm not sure I'll go back to it. If it had a few unlockables or something more, I'd probably be all over it though. Dune Sea, developed by Frolic Labs and published by Joydrop, is a super chill side-scrolling game. You fly around as a bird in a 2.5D-like world reminiscent of the Runner series, but with very relaxing aesthetics and taking place in the desert of Journey by that game company. $10 seems pretty fair for Dune Sea. Keen, One Girl Army by Phoenix with 2 X's, so technically it's like Phoenix. It's a top-down adventure that mixes turn-based combat and block sliding puzzles to neat effect, and it released for $14.39. The Wanderer, Frankenstein's Creature by Art Experience is an adventure game, I think. Or a visual novel with minigames? I don't know, the art looks cool, but it's not $14.39 cool. And we've got 4 Nindie no-nos this week, starting with Eagle Talon vs. Horde of the Flies by Deco, and it's a single-screen action platformer for $8 that came right out of a Pentium 2 browsing eBaum's World in 1999. Final Sword is a port of Hup Games' old third-person action-adventure for Android, and they like to throw in Comic Sans at will. That one's $7 on Android, and the exact same title is $17.70 on the Switch. Yikes. Tennis 1920s is, and I'm not kidding here, a free-to-play tennis game that looks barely better than a PlayStation 1 title. It looks bad enough without having to imagine all of the free-to-play mechanics hidden inside. Now, apparently the team at Helium 9 Games made a recreation of life in tennis from the Roaring '20s, but, well, based on, I'll say, who is and is not playing tennis, I think they might be looking back on this time period with some seriously rose-tinted glasses. And finally, Balloon Pop for Toddlers and Kids Learn Number, Letter, Colors, and Animals is the newest entry in the Balloon Pop for Toddlers and Kids series of games for toddlers and kids built around popping balloons and learning number, letter, colors, and animals. If your toddler or kid wants to learn about number, letter, colors, and animals while popping balloons, there is clearly only one option to pop balloons for toddlers and kids and learn number, letter, colors, and animals, and that is clearly Balloon Pop for Toddlers and Kids Learn Number, Letter, Colors, and Animals. $7. Thanks, Winterworks. Phew, there you go. Something you don't see every day. I'm pretty sure 4 of those games are worth checking out. 3 of them make my insides feel bad. 1 of them is an older game in disguise, and the other is Balloon Pop for Toddlers and Kids Learn Number, Letter, Colors, and Animals. Next week, though, there's even more, and I'm gonna say it, this is another best week for indies of the year. With 17 games releasing from July 4th through the 10th, let's find which ones are going to keep your Joy-Cons synced. On July 4th, the day many Americans celebrate the country's independence, Mancebo Games releases a title with the tagline, "This is the story of how the best day of your life can become a nightmare full of zombies." And you know, I can see where they're going with this. Zombies Ruined My Day is just a mobile side-scrolling action game ported to the Switch with an art style that screams, "Hey, I'm a mobile game!" So if you don't want to play it for free on your phone, I guess you can always pay $4 to play it on your Switch? On July 6th, Ultimate Games and Spawn Point are convinced that their game about digging into the earth to purge a hiding alien race doesn't need to hit the eShop the same day as every other title. Gertie stands alone, and it's $12.99. As far as gameplay goes, well, Gertie is a nicely pixelated twin-stick shooter with procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. From what I'm seeing here, I can't wait to play more. On July 7th, we see the release of one of the more notable games from past Indie World presentations as Pillow Castle Games' mind-bending first-person visual puzzle called Superliminal releases for $16 flat, a 20% discount for launch week. If you haven't seen this game yet, there's not much like it. You solve puzzles by changing your perspective around a room, which then makes objects grow and shrink and be manipulated based on the angle at which you view them. It's cool stuff, and Superliminal has been receiving solid reviews as well as a ton of airtime on Twitch recently. Fans of games like The Witness or Portal will likely have a great time with Superliminal. Moving on to this week's Big Thursday drop, we get 9 brand new Nindies that run the entire gamut in terms of quality, and there's no place I'd rather start than with a title I already consider in the running for Nindie of the Year. CrossCode by Deck 13 and Radical Fish Games is kinda like if you took the best aspects from the RPG gems of the Super Nintendo, modernized it a bit, and turned it into a highly polished action RPG that hits every note that any fan of RPGs or action adventures could want. If you've been with Nindie Nation for a while, you know that I've been singing the praises of this game since its first unveiling nearly 2 years ago, and then sung even louder when I got my hands on a copy for PC. Even earlier this year, we published a Nindies We Love video focused on 5 indies coming in 2020 that need to be on everyone's radar, and here's why CrossCode deserved top placement in that video. The story follows Leah, a girl living inside of the world of an online game who is having to relearn her past, her abilities, and even how to speak. She does all of this while meeting an exceptional cast of characters and uncovering long-lost secrets about the world she's lived in, or maybe just existed in, because it's not entirely clear why Leah is inside CrossCode's digital world, or if she's more than just a digital avatar. The general gameplay is a top-down action RPG with a dense list of attainable abilities, HP, MP, all the things that come with any other top-tier game in the genre. In addition to open worlds and branching optional narratives, CrossCode's core is in the sprawling 8 dungeons that give even the best Zelda dungeons a run for their money. Battles are fast and in real time with performance as smooth as butter, and the soundtrack is among my very favorites on the Switch. CrossCode launches for $20, and if you can't tell, I think you should get it if any of this sounds even remotely interesting. And I also think this is the caliber of game that could win over fans who don't typically play RPGs just because of the deep combat and puzzle systems. The game is said to take 30 to 80 hours to complete, but you're gonna want to tackle a lot of the side quests, so I would go in expecting at least 50 hours of glorious content. I really want to hear what all of you think, so please, if you end up checking out CrossCode, if you've already played it, or if this coverage has persuaded you to dig in deeper, let me know in the YouTube comments or on Twitter at Nindie Nation. It's not really fair for any indie game to have to follow up a game like CrossCode in this week's release list, so we'll go next to a game that is total garbage and you won't buy anyways. How's that? What better place to turn than to get another overpriced, oversimplified mobile port of a card or casino game by Nindie No-No extraordinaire 7 Levels. That's right, 7 Levels, we're talking about your release of Solitaire Tri-Peaks Flowers for $5.99, and it's Solitaire with a presentation that defines the bare minimum. Following that, we're going to the next release by D3 Publisher, who has a broad portfolio of licensed properties, mid-tier or AA releases, and well, games like Dangerous Relationship. It's an anime romance visual novel that basically has you stalking and worming your way into the life of a celebrity to become someone's girlfriend. I'm not exactly sure why, but many of these D3 published games carry in their description the qualifier that this is a romance game for women. Okay? If you want to trick yourself into thinking this game is a good use of your time, you could spend $15, or you could try out the demo, but I wouldn't recommend either. Do you like turn-based tactical RPGs? If so, Silesia Games and Wavelight Games have just the ticket for you this week when they release Demon's Rise War for the Deep for just $4.89. This looks like another mobile port, but that's not always a bad thing. Graphics are just a wee bit better than maybe Diablo 2, but there's also a ton of content here. With an estimated 80 hours of gameplay and 50 different character classes to try out, a price just below $5 makes Demon's Rise a perfectly serviceable option if you're looking for your turn-based dungeon crawling fix this week. Just set your expectations accordingly. Also on July 9th, developer Limit Break, nice Final Fantasy reference, drops the side-scrolling space shooter 1993 Shenandoah for $12.99. Having just played Salamander, also known as Life Force, on my TurboGrafx 16 Mini, it's easy to see where Limit Break gets their inspiration. You can bring up to 3 friends along for the ride, which is nice, but otherwise 1993 Shenandoah appears to just be another side-scrolling space shooter inspired by the classics of the 80s and 90s, and there's already plenty of those options in that category for much less than $12.99. Next up is a game that I think you're going to want to put on your radar. One Rat Games is an indie studio headed up by a guy named Dylan Walker, who has hosted various indie game jams, filled out a nice portfolio of releases on the indie platform Itch.io, and just seems like a good guy who wants to help indie games get more time in the spotlight. In partnership with another indie studio, which is an excellent name, Dylan's first title for the Switch, called Elden: Path of the Forgotten, releases for $15.99, with a slight discount for the first week of $14.39. Elden is a top-down action RPG with stylings that fall somewhere between Hyper Light Drifter and Children of Morta. The sci-fi Lovecraftian aesthetic is very nice, and the action is based more so on reaction than just aggressive hacking and slashing, which is a welcome change of pace. The reviews haven't hit yet by the time this episode publishes, but Elden: Path of the Forgotten shows potential, and if early previews are any indication, it could be something special. But you know what isn't special? 7 Levels dropping more garbage on the eShop this week. But yet, here we are with Crowdy Farm Puzzle for $5.99. Now, not being entirely sure Crowdy is a word, I looked it up, and sure enough, it is a soft Scottish cheese. What is this game? I'm glad you asked. Straight from the brilliance in play at 7 Levels. Awake your imagination and relax in this colorful 5-in-1 puzzle games collection. Crowdy Farm needs your smart head. You will have to solve many brain teasers to bring order to this place. Cover grass fields with colors, set animals in matching rows, and learn the work of a shepherd dog. But be precise, your thinking needs accuracy. Make yourself cozy and dedicate to answer the riddle with no pressure. 150 puzzles to solve, each one is satisfying and colorful level to scratch your head for. Flynn's Arcade is not only the name of the arcade in the Tron movies, but also the name of our next developer. The fact that they just up and used an existing property as their company name could at first be surprising, but when you see their title this week, that feeling will quickly subside. Laran is supposed to be a surreal exploration game, but from everything I can gather, it just looks like a low-poly clone of Journey. And for $6, might I suggest a cheeseburger from Five Guys instead? Sound off in the comments below with your favorite fast food burger. We're not quite through the new releases, but rounding out the Thursday drop is another anime romance something or other by Query8, who has been making a name for themselves as the publisher that finds every gray area of questionably appropriate content for really anything, and they just marinate in it. This week's release is Trouble Days for $7.99, and it is described as
cohabitation with a naive succubus? The creatures of the demon world known as succubus use a male's sexual energy, his techno-force, as their nourishment. Can Lovelia successfully harvest techno-force? Set in Akihabara, the awkwardly funny and slightly naughtier new life of one naive succubus begins.
And I think we've heard just enough out of that one. Now, we've got 5 titles releasing Friday, July 10th, but one of them, the one we're all most excited for of the bunch, comes with a bold prediction. Recently, I predicted a surprise direct after noticing all of the eShop discounts expiring on a date that I rarely see, which to me signaled a big update for something that would drive a lot of fresh traffic to the eShop. It actually turned out that I was right on, as the day those deals expired, a Pokemon Direct was announced for the following day, and this could be another one of those stories. Last week, during the New Game Plus Expo, Inti Creates, one of my favorite indie developers, responsible for titles like Azure Striker Gunvolt, Mega Man Zero, and Blaster Master Zero, announced their sequel to the immaculate Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, the retro-styled companion to Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. In their trailer, they showed a ton of gameplay variety and ended with a coming soon release date. This led most to believe the game was just coming out sometime later this year. However, after looking at the eShop releases next week, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2 is slated to release July 10th, next Friday. It seems weird to me that they would so quietly state their brand new game is releasing only a week after the announcement that contained such vague information. In the past, Inti Creates has been the team responsible for a couple of games shadow dropped during a Nindie Direct or Indie World presentation, most recently with Blaster Master Zero 2. If you're catching my drift here, I'm predicting that on Friday, July 10th, we're going to have an Indie World presentation, and that one of the announcements is that Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2 will be that presentation's shadow drop. So we'll see next week, but either way, based on the incredible outcome of the original game, I fully expect the new sequel to be well worth the $14.99 asking price. Barring any unexpected issues with the initial release, recommending this game is a total no-brainer, and if you haven't yet, check out the original Bloodstained Curse of the Moon for some Castlevania 3-inspired throwback excellence. Also on the 10th, Drakius Games publishes a game that hopefully remains fictional. In The Great Perhaps, you play as an astronaut returning to Earth to find it in shambles, and it plays out like a 2D time-traveling adventure game with a Fallout-like tone. If you're a fan of time travel, pointing and clicking, and the post-apocalypse, perhaps The Great Perhaps is worth your $9.99. Oh, and the game most unlikely to get a sequel gets exactly that when Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise releases by Rising Star Games and Toybox for $49.99. Look, these games are super weird. It's even hard to describe what it is. It's kind of a detective game, but it's just B-movie awful and super confusing, and a good deal of people love it. If you've played and actually completed the original, you're probably all over this already. If you haven't played any of these games, I guess go try the first, because this series belongs to a very niche audience. You know what I don't need to see right now? A freaking zombie deer owl. Spookies aside, I probably don't have to tell you too much about what you should expect from No Gravity Games' new $10 title Creepy Tale, but I'm gonna, cause it looks cool. So it's a side-scrolling spooky adventure game in this really unsettling hand-drawn art style, like what you'd see looking through a fairy tale book from the 1940s that is scary because it's trying not to be. It's kind of why Cuphead works so well, right? It's this effective art style with two brothers who wander into the woods and one of them gets captured. Everything I can read about this game really reminds me of sitting around a dark room at a sleepover, reading through the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. Does that date me? That shit was scary. You know what else is scary? Boombit Games has re-released the exact same racing game as the last 3 weeks in a row, complete with mobile touchscreen prompts and all, and is charging $8.99 for gas station highway services. I think we've found our next Kairosoft with Boombit. Be proud, that is not a badge I would want to wear. So, I'm going to reiterate after doing a bit more research, I think we're getting an Indie Direct next week. Just gonna put that out there. I'm calling an announcement on July 9th and a presentation on the 10th, with the shadow drop of Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2 headlining. If that does happen, I'll likely be at the ready for a quick one-off podcast to cover the games, but either way, we're not done yet, citizens. We've still got deals to cover, and there's a bunch expiring, so we've got some new ones to look at. Out of 581 games currently on sale, here are our picks for the best deals through at least July 10th. And wouldn't you know it, remember last week when I called out those ridiculously priced Digerati bundles and said wait for a sale? Well, they are now on sale, and I absolutely recommend you pick up Couch Co-op Bundle Volume 2 while it's 85% off for only $6.89. You get Bleed, the awesome side-scrolling action game, Vertical Drop Heroes, the downward-moving action platformer with procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. Black Paradox, a side-scrolling shmup with great music and a roguelike upgrade system, and all three of these are featured in various Let's Play Nindies or Nindies We Love videos on the Nindie Nation YouTube channel. Plus, you get Shikondo, an award-winning vertical shoot-'em-up. It's a great deal at $1.72 per game. Cave Story Plus, the definitive edition of the definitive indie game, is a whopping 66% off for only $9.99 and is the best price yet for this highly polished side-scrolling action-adventure that has been critically beloved for over a decade. This is the one that I picked up this week. Cubic Games is running a bunch of deals right now, and all prices are at their lowest yet through July 24th, including these, pleasantly mediocre titles that just might be worth checking out at this price. Coffee Crisis is a fun arcade brawler with a funny overtone and great music for 99 cents. Get Me Outta Here is a fun little side-scrolling action game basically about if Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force got abducted by aliens, and that one is also 99 cents. And look, this one, Warlocks 2 Godslayers, is not very good at all, but I've got a complicated past with it because I was straight up hooked to its janky but surprisingly deep implementation of a side-scrolling action RPG with procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. It's $1.79, and I liked it. It wasn't very good, and I didn't finish it, but I got my money's worth out of it. Oh, and it's really funny. And there's Monospark, which we've featured on this show a lot. It's almost always 99 cents when it's on sale, and that's the case here as well. It's a pretty solid twin-stick roguelike with a neat story and and it has procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. Yeah. But I think the difficulty curve is a bit too unforgiving because the controls are a bit too twitchy, but it's a good one to pick up for just $1. The Mutant Mudds collection is a fantastic and very easy recommendation if you like traditional side-scrolling action platformers with a good deal of challenge. A really good deal of challenge. This bundle includes all three games, including a remaster of the WiiWare original, and although these games may frustrate you, it's just part of the challenge as the mechanics and overall polish is there in droves. Mutant Mudds collection is $179, which is 90% off and a great deal to consider as long as you're into this type of game. Infinite Beyond the Mind is a pixelated 2D action game very similar to Bleed, which I love. This one has a bit more of a chibi anime sci-fi flair and isn't quite as good as Bleed in my opinion, but if you checked out Bleed based on my recommendation in the past and you want more, Infinite Beyond the Mind is currently half off for $4.99. And Demon's Tilt is the spiritual successor to the wonderfully spooky pinball games Alien Crush and Devil's Crush from the TurboGrafx 16. This game is pricey considering there's only one table, however, that table is like 5 in 1, it's huge and constantly changing. But this is, in my totally uneducated opinion, the best pinball game there is on the Switch, so I'll take their 30% discount and recommend Demon's Tilt for $13.99. Hyper Parasite is a top-down twin-stick shooter set in an 80s sci-fi world with the hook that you are the titular parasite and can assume the bodies of over 60 characters. If you're wondering, yes, this game has procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. A lot of those this week. If you're a fan of soccer or football to approximately 31% of you citizens, Golazo is a really fun soccer game built around the arcade ideals that make each game fun and fast-paced and never bogged down with the simulation stuff. Golazo is currently 60% off for $5.99 and a great time to have with a bunch of friends on a couch. And last but not least, I'm going to plug an oldie but a goodie with The Forbidden Arts. This game is like half 3D open world and half side-scrolling action. It's also a game that doesn't look impressive until you have it running on the Switch in front of you in handheld mode. At that time, it becomes a really nice mix of two genres that are blended together very well. The Forbidden Arts is half off for $7.49. Phew! Lots of bundles this week. Digerati bundles, Mutant Mud bundles, and Cubic is discounting a bundle of their games. Maybe that last example doesn't work. Did you know that there's an owner discount where a lot of these indie developers and publishers will give you a baked-in 30% discount on any game if you own one of their previous titles? Here's a good example. You can get Biolab Wars for 79 cents right now, and then you can get almost $5 off of Towaga, as they're both from Forever Entertainment. They do this, Digerati does this, and I'm gathering a list of others to share because it certainly isn't very well communicated on the eShop. Are there any publishers you know that participate in the ownership program? Are you picking up any of this week's games? Let me know in the YouTube comments or on Twitter @Nindie Nation. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget we've got a bunch of content from Let's Plays to Nindies We Love videos, so go check them out, subscribe if you haven't, and throw us a like for anything that helped you make a decision about an indie. For everything else Nintendo, check out our friends at the Nintendo Village. Those guys are churning out daily news articles and features, reviews, and a bunch of their own YouTube and podcast content, and you can find it all at thenintendovillage.com. Thanks for hanging out with us this week, citizens. My indie spidey sense is tingling, and I think we're getting some big announcements coming soon. Plus, we're now in July, and there's at least 2 big releases coming out every episode for the rest of probably the summer, so stick with us as we check out all of these future releases. But that's all for another time, and we're all done for this week. So once again, thanks for listening or watching, and sharing with other fans of indie games. Until next week, I'm Jeff. This has been Nindie Nation episode 72, and for all your indie gaming needs, we'll be right here to help you find just the game to keep your Joy-Cons synced.